Second, yeah. Hey all, welcome to Deep Learning Classics and Trends. This week we have, I'm going to say it incorrectly, Subhash Katamner
Close.
Katamneni.
Kantamneni.
Katamneni. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I really should have practiced that at least once before I record. We have Subhash presenting his paper on how language models use trigonometry to do addition. This is the first series we're having in a series of 5 parts, or fingers crossed 6 parts if I get the sixth author to commit, on LLM interpretability. We have folks from MIT today and Cerebrus next week, Anthropic, DeepMind, UCL, Northeastern University presenting in the next five or 6 weeks. We also have Research Jam 28 coming up, or sorry, 27 coming up on May 28th. If you want to submit and present, I'm going to put the link in the chat there. The Research Jam, basically, if you want, it's like a virtual lab meeting. If you're working on a project and you want some accountability or feedback, just show up, present your plots, talk about it with some other excited, smart people, and force yourself to get some research done. Cool. I think without further ado, Subhash, you want to take it away?
Yeah, definitely. And also, Jason, what should I slot my time for? Like, should I
Uh,
finish around?
we have the whole 1 hour slot. I would try to
Okay.
finish a bit early and leave time for questions, although people often do questions interleave throughout.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, if you can go over, we can leave the Zoom on after the hour, but a lot of people will have to leave at the hour.
Yeah, that sounds fine. You guys can all see this though, right?
Yep.
All right, great. So thank you guys. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Subhash. I'm presenting on my paper, Language Models Use Trigonometry to Do Addition. Really a little bit about me. Right now I'm a master's student at MIT. I'm advised by Max Tegmark there. I did my undergraduate degree at MIT as well. I graduated last year in physics and computer science. This summer I'm joining the alignment science team at Anthropic under Sam Marks. Here's my personal email and my Twitter in case anybody ever wants to talk to me about this or anything else. So I guess high level, it seems like this paper is the first in a sequence of interpretability related papers. So I thought I would start off with a little bit of an introduction to the field as a whole. So what is mechanistic interpretability? So MI, mechanistic interpretability, aims to understand neural networks from the ground up. And primarily when we say neural networks, we think a lot about large language models. So the idea is that you want to analyze model internals, so the hidden states of models, what are known as the activations of models, in order to control and understand model behavior. Or I guess it should be the opposite way. You want to understand model behavior first, and hopefully from there you can control models better. So what's the motivation? Why do we want to work on this at all? So at least one motivation is from an AI safety angle, which is my primary motivation. So as models grow stronger, they have this greater capacity to deceive or be harmful to people. And I think for a long time, this kind of sounded like science fiction. There have been a few recent results that were a little bit concerning to me and a lot of people in the field. There was this recent result from Palisades Research that found that, if O1 plays against Stockfish in a chess match, O1 will realize that it can't beat Stockfish and instead delete Stockfish's files, which is not something we want, especially as models get stronger. There was some alignment faking work from Anthropic finding that Claude, depending on who it's talking to, what user it's talking to, if it thinks certain users of a certain background or something like that, it'll treat users very differently and pursue goals that are independent of the users. So it has this autonomous capability to it. And I guess if anybody's used O3 has a much greater capacity for hallucination than most models that I've used in the past. So it seems like there's this thing where models are doing one thing and we want them to do another thing. There's some sort of broad misalignment. And the idea is that understanding model internals might be the only way to guarantee safety. So in some sense, we see that as models get more intelligent, they get more capable of deception and stuff like that. And you can imagine a model in the future that's totally misaligned. Maybe it has 50 layers. It spends the first 25 layers coming up with this really devious, carefully crafted plan. And the next 25 layers translating that plan into something that sounds really good to the user, but actually is really harmful at the end. It could manipulate its chain of thought. And again, we're seeing a lot of, chain of thought unfaithfulness right now as well. A lot of these things are worrying. I think interpretability is one of the most promising things we could do in order to discover these things about models. And Like mechanistic interpretation really again focuses mostly on the transformer architecture because transformers underlie all large language models. And you would think like, LLMs got large in the name, must be extremely complicated. But transformers are a very like surprisingly simple architecture in some sense. The transformer architecture, very quickly for those who don't know, it's one residual block just like copy pasted, 50 times, 100 times, 200 times, whatever. But this residual block itself is like very simple and like mostly linear. So we see like we have some sort of token space that we then embed. After that, we have these attention heads that find like linear combinations of different tokens and add up to create like the new token. Then we have like an MLP, a multi-layer perceptron that applies some up projection and then applies a nonlinearity and then a down projection. And we just repeat that over and over again until we, unembed the representations and go back to logit space. So like actually like what's happening there, attention is, I think of attention as almost basically linear. There's that softmax inside of it, but it's really adding up a linear combination of different tokens. And then an MLP, for the most part, this up projection and down projection are also like, hugely linear. There's the middle ReLU that is nonlinear, but for the most part, there's a lot of linearity going on in transformers. And also, if this is too fast or you have any questions, please jump in. But one branch of mechanistic interpretability research aims to understand the representations inside of transformers. So this is called features research. We call features like the representations. So there's this thing, really big hypothesis in mechanistic interpretability. It kind of underlines like most of how we think about MI. It's called the linear representation hypothesis. So the idea here is it posits that features are like linear. So a feature here is like a human interpretable concept. So the most like famous example of this probably is this like king, queen, like man, woman thing that we've seen. This was like 10 years ago in Word2Vec. This is like one of my favorite canonical, machine learning results. That the representation for queen is a representation for king plus woman minus man. In other words, queen is like king plus the female feature direction. And same way in like for woman is man plus the female feature direction. So like the dream of MI is that like all of these different concepts in LLMs can be linearly represented as like these features as we call them. So if LRH is true, like LLM activations should be totally decomposable. So I take any concept, I can take Lightning McQueen or whatever. Lightning McQueen can be equal to car plus red plus fictional plus Disney plus movies plus all the other like concepts to make Lightning McQueen a thing. And like ideally we could find all these like decomposable directions. This is like a big dream of MI. So the other direction that people in
Josh,
MI go, yes.
I'm going to chime in with a question. Actually,
Yeah.
Jianming has a question in the chat. Asks, I don't know if you can see the chat, but he asked,
I can't.
does GPT-4 have this property? So this same kind of woman, man, queen, king property.
So I mean, GPT-4 is a private model. I would bet the house that it does, though. This is like a very common, like, this property has been seen across like almost every open LLM. All LLMs basically have this type of like emergent like representation space. Is very beautiful, but I actually don't know because I can't access GPT.
I mean, I guess not that you've necessarily answered this, but I guess we could use GPT-2 or any other open model and answer these questions.
Yeah.
But what layer would we even be considering? Like this original Word2Vec work that you're showing here was specifically learning a single embedding vector for each word. And
Yeah.
it was easy to do the math. But like for an LLM, where are we taking the representation?
You can take that wherever you want. So I think like my guess is that so generally how these things work is like the representation is strongest in like the middle layers. So this is when it develops like an intermediate representation to use. For something as simple as like queen, is king plus woman minus man or something, that would come like very quickly, I'd imagine, like probably in the first few layers. You can imagine like more complex concepts that require like for like the most basic example is like something like Star Wars. So if Star Wars requires like two tokens, then like the first layer is not going to show the representation for Star Wars because like the transformer needs to like combine Star and Wars into the concept for Star Wars at some point. But generally these things happen pretty early. Like middle layers are strongest, but these things happen everywhere. And GPT-2 shows these properties.
So you think you would concretely, if you just picked a layer somewhere in the middle and took the representation, like let's say the value representation, the value output at that layer for that specific token, this
Mhm.
might be roughly linear.
Yeah. I think like for many properties it is linear. Actually, this paper shows the property like something that it's not linear for, but generally,
Mm,
yeah, it almost always is like very linear.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jianming says maybe no studies are published here, but there have to be some. please put in the chat if anyone knows any of these papers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too off topic, but sparse autoencoders, I don't know if you guys have heard of these SAEs. They try to like automatically decompose activations into linear directions. So like Leo Gao at OpenAI published an SAE paper where they decomposed GPT-4's activations into linear directions using SAE. So like in some sense, it's been verified already. That paper is called Scaling Sparse Autoencoders, I think.
Is that the same though, or is that a different property? And I guess maybe we shouldn't get too far in the weeds, but if you train a sparse autoencoder on something, it might it might produce a sparse representation even given non-linear initial representations, right?
Plausibly, but like would they be semantically meaningful? So for example, like would the latent or like the activation in an SAE only activate on like, king or queen or like royalty stuff? If it was nonlinear, I'm not totally sure. Although I think SAEs have a lot of problems. And that this paper actually gets into that a little bit as well. Yeah. So I guess like the other direction of MI research, and this is a little bit more geared to what I'll be presenting on in the second half of this, is called circuits research. So circuits research traces computation through a transformer. So instead of dealing with representations, we see how like different like MLPs or attention heads contribute to like the final output of how a transformer completes a task. Yeah, so one of the most famous examples is these things called induction heads that Anthropic found very early on. And these induction heads are normal attention heads that are primarily in charge of doing in-context learning in a transformer. So in-context learning is like, if you give a transformer multiple examples of something, it'll be able to like extrapolate and do like the nth example better than the n minus first example. So an induction head here, so this attention head is attending to the word ers, like the phrase ers in the yellow box down there. And it's attending back to different examples of Lee. So Lee in the past, this attention head knows usually comes after ers, and this is how it promotes it to like the next token in some sense. So this attention head is in charge of finding past examples of like the same thing that we're looking at right now. Yeah. So this kind of gets us to like the premise of this project that was previously just like general MI background. How do language models like mathematically reason? So I've been, I think I've been really impressed with like a lot of the recent model releases that show like language models have some capacity to mathematically reason. Like the O3 frontier math results were like really impressive to me. O1 in general was very good at like my graduate ML class, like PSETs, and was very surprising to me as well. So like these models are able to do calculations and combine those calculations to solve tasks. This is like the very basic example of reasoning I'm giving. I don't know if that's the actual definition, but despite their proficiency in reasoning, we don't know like how LLMs reason. So are they actually doing any calculations internally, or is there like this like really nice like problem templates, and you're actually just like looking up things in a value table and you're just doing some sort of regex and it's not really that interesting? So I guess like the way I think about it, my PI is a physicist and I come from a physics background. So like what's the simplest problem within this field that we still profoundly like do not understand? And I would argue that like addition is like a problem that we still really don't know how LLMs do addition, at least before this paper. So that kind of like brings us to this paper itself. So language models use trigonometry to do addition. So like the basic question here, I mean, to like get more specific, is how do medium-sized language models do two-digit addition? So like the set of problems we're considering here are A plus B. So A plus B equals something for A and B from between 0 and 99. So, this could be like 12 plus 35, whatever. We studied primarily 3 LLMs in this paper, GPT-J, which is a 6 billion parameter model, Pythia 6.9b, and Llama 3.18b. So this plot here shows on the x-axis the value of A in the equation we're trying to do, and the y-axis the value of B. And there's a blue square if the LLM is able to do the problem correctly and produce the correct answer, like 12 plus 35 is 47. And it's a white square if the LLM is unable to do the problem. So you see like all these LLMs are actually like quite good at this task. Llama 3.18b has like a 98% accuracy on this task. And, Pythia and GPT-J both have a greater than 75% accuracy.
Subhash, can you clarify what you mean by GPT-J has simple MLPs, like as opposed to?
Yeah, so there are a few different MLP structures. So like, for example, GPT-J, by simple MLP, I mean, it just has an up projection, a GELU activation, and a down projection. So this is like a simple MLP. So like Llama 3.18b, I think, has a gated MLP. I'm not well, this is my guess for what that does. It does a like linear up projection and also a non-linear up projection, and then does a like element-wise product between those two. So it's a little bit more complex, and because GPTJ has simple MLPs, it's a little bit easier to analyze.
Hmm. And then what exact prompt did you use? And did you find these accuracy results were sensitive to that at all?
Yeah, yeah. If you just give it a plus b equals, like most models will be pretty bad. The exact prompts are in the paper. It's probably just like a sentence of text, and then it's like a plus b equals.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Looks like Andrew has a question. Andrew, do you want
Yeah, quickly, do these A and B digits get tokenized into nice single digits, or do they
Yeah,
get split up?
that's a really good question, actually. So I chose these three models specifically because they tokenize the numbers from like 0 to like 500, essentially as single tokens. So like tokenization actually in general in interpretability is a huge mess. Like if you have a lot of prompts that have 9 tokens and some prompts that have 8 tokens, it just gets really confusing what to do. So these models were chosen in the single token regime. So that was a great question. Yeah. So I guess like how do we like want to think about how to solve this problem? So like putting on our like mechanistic interpretability hats, we want to take like this bottom up approach to understanding how LLMs do A plus B. So the way I would describe this is we first want to understand the operational primitives. Like how do LLMs actually represent numbers A and B? So going back to like our previous slides on mechanistic interpretability, this lies within like features research. We want to understand the representations of A and B. And then the next thing we want to do is circuits research. We want to figure out how these primitives are combined. So like given this representation of A and B, what function f of A comma B is used to like produce the final answer A plus B. Yeah. So like let's start with the first question. How do LLMs represent numbers? So we take the hidden states at layer 0 of this like LLM GPTJ for all A between 0 and 360. So for GPTJ, the numbers between 0 and 360 are tokenized as one token. So that's why like we consider this to be our working set of numbers for GPTJ. So yeah, we look at layer 0. Now we have this like, if GPTJ has like a 4,000 dimensional embedding space, we have this 360 by 4,000 dimensional like block, this matrix to look at the representations of. So we can we can Fourier decompose this matrix with respect to A. And we actually find, and we can average across like the embedding dimension. And we find that there's like a very strong periodicity. This is this top graph here at different periods. So like, you'd expect for like a non-periodic signal for the Fourier domain to be, very noisy and not really have any strong spikes. But, we see a very surprising strike in at periods of 2, 5, 10, and 100 in the Fourier domain. And
Yes,
the other like,
can I ask a question here?
yeah.
Hidden states H0. So you
Mhm.
are okay, you're taking a model, you're putting in first the token for the numbers 0, I guess, then token for the number 1. Are these
Yes.
completely separate prompts? Is there a whole prompt
Yeah,
with
yeah.
number
This is a great
7?
question. So right now for these prompts, I'm literally just inputting a number. There's
A
nothing
single
else in the
token.
prompt at all. Yeah.
Cool.
So I'm just looking at a single token at layer 0 for the numbers from 0 to 360.
Okay. And when you say at layer 0, so we have the token, let's say for the number 7,
Yeah.
which is some dimension. We then, is this just reading out of the embedding matrix?
Yes,
Or
this is
you're going
actually just the
through
embedding. So this is
the
before
embedding matrix.
MLPs or any attention or anything like that.
Okay, cool.
Um,
That's simple. I
yeah.
like that. And then finally,
Great.
maybe I'm not smart enough to have this be obvious, but how do you compute the Fourier representation of a bunch of 4,000 dimensional vectors?
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually like not comfortable with the Fourier math myself. My like PI helped me a
No
lot
one
with this.
really.
Yeah. But from what I understand, it's like you Fourier decompose across. So you have this 360 by 4,000 dimensional matrix. You
Yep.
Fourier decompose across the 360 dimensions. So now I have this 4,000 dimensional vector, or 4,000 dimensional by the number of frequencies, I think. And then from there, I average across all the 4,000 dimensions of the embedding space. But there's
Okay.
some
Okay.
writing in the paper about this that makes it clear. But yeah, I'm not super comfortable with the math myself
Cool.
for this
If you,
part.
if you average across the dimensions, that makes
Yeah,
perfect.
it's averaging across the dimensions.
Cool.
So,
Cool.
so that's like the one signal is that we have these periodic Fourier components. The second signal that we have is we take the same 360 by 4,000 dimensional vector, and now we PCA it. So PCA is like a lot more simple. And if we looked at the first PCA component, that has like, I don't know, like 20% of the variance or something like that of the entire matrix. This happens to be a linear direction. So like we have these two kind of signals about what we're looking at. We have that this matrix is both periodic and that it has some very strong linear structure. So this like makes us propose a helix for the possible way that numbers are represented. So I guess like we have this idea that is a helix. How do we actually parameterize a helix? So this is the way that I think about it. You have this like set of basis of functions, right? So a helix with n periodic components has like 2n functions for periodicity, the sine, like a sine function and a cosine function for every like t of I. So like in this case, like T1 might be equal to 2, and T2 is 5, and T3 is 10, and T4 is 100 based off our Fourier decomposition. And there's one like linear direction. So, with 4 periodic components and like 1 linear direction using the 4 periodic components on the previous graph, we now have like a basis of 9 directions. And we can find some coefficient matrix or something that we can apply to that basis dimension. So like just to like get like a little bit more clear on this. So like, H of A of L. So like this is like at layer L, the hidden states on token A, we're claiming can be represented as like some coefficient matrix times only a basis of these like 9 functions essentially. Is that clear? If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them on the slide as well.
What's the A? I understand the cosines and the sines.
Yeah, the A is so in these prompts like A plus B. This is a good question because we're going to stick with this notation for the most of the paper. Like A and B are like the numbers we're using in our addition problem. So like like 12 plus 35, A is 12 in that case. Yeah. Okay, great. So like we can take this, so essentially we have this like 360 by 4,000 dimensional like H of 0 of A essentially, right? And we can fit this, we can find some set of coefficients that when applied to like this basis, gets us like fits this this like hidden dimension matrix like really well. So like what does that look like? Here is like our helical subspace when we project it, and it looks, it's very beautiful, I think. So the plot underneath shows like, when I take my hidden state matrix and I project it back into my basis, these are what the different like points look like. And you see like, in the t equals 2 space, like, okay, everything that ends, all numbers A that end with 1 are in yellow, and all numbers are in one clump, and all numbers A that end with 0 mod 2 are in a different clump. So like, this is kind of what we expect. There's like some separation.
Wait, sorry, what? So in the top left square, you have a bunch of yellow points labeled 1 and a bunch of purple points, I think, labeled 0.
Yeah.
What is this plot?
This is like so like let's take a bunch of problems like 12 plus 35 or something like that. So so if I have this like this matrix H of A of L, and I just apply C inverse on it, then I should get my basis back. Does that make sense? Because like we're saying that H of A of L equals C of BA transpose.
Yeah, so you're computing the representation in this reduced basis.
Exactly.
Given.
So we first find the coefficients C that like make this fit the best, like reducing mean squared error of like how good, we want C to project B of A into like H of A of L like really, really well.
Right,
and then we project
is a single parameter learned across all tokens. It's like a shared.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then
and this is like averaged over the embedding dimension, right?
So C here is a like, so B of A is like 9, B of A transpose is like 9 by 1, and C here is like 4,000 by 9.
How do you get the 9 by 1? So for each of the, like every time A appears in the BFA, that's basically average over the embedding dimensions. Is that correct?
No. So like we're saying that, okay, so if I'm running the prompt like 1 plus 10 or something, so I plug in 1 because that's my value of A inside my basis, and then I apply the coefficient matrix C to my basis. And then I get what should be the embedding for 1. Does that make sense?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, so whatever value of A is in my current problem, that's what I'm plugging in, essentially.
And you're then learning the values in C and in T1, T2, T3. Are you learning that via kind of like gradient descent using MSE or something?
So C is the only thing that's learned here. So T1, T2, T3, we have n equals 4. So T1, T2, T3, T4 are all from our Fourier decomposition. We know
You
these are the
pick out the
periods.
piece. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So
this has nothing to do with the actual embedding that you were talking. So this analysis, if we go back to the previous slide, was done on the embeddings.
Yeah.
Right. But then when you're calculating the basis, you're just plugging in the actual number, right?
Yeah, we're finding an analytical form for what the embeddings are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But you're not actually using the embedding values anymore. You're just plugging in the actual numbers.
Yes, but we're using the embedding values to find the coefficient matrix C such that we can just plug in the numbers. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Okay. All right. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we can take this like C inverse and apply it to our hidden states to project all the numbers back into B. And I guess like, if we just learned a random matrix C, then this projection would be really bad. It wouldn't look like we're actually learning sines and cosines and like linear directions and stuff. But like the point is here.
Quick question. What's the index of B? Is it like a layer number? B is a
What is the
index of B? B is a vector, right? So
yeah, B is a 9x1 vector.
Yeah. What's the size? 9x1?
Yeah, because there's
where's the dimension 9 come from? Is this just some kind of principal component cutoff or what?
No. So it kind of comes back to this is that like, if you're using n periodic components, it's just in the definition of the basis here. So like you can see, for every period T of I, there's like a cosine and a sine term. And there's also a global like linear term. So I'm using 4 periodic components. That's like 4 times 2 cosine and sine basis terms. So that's 8 plus 1 linear direction. That's 9 total values in the basis. Does that make sense?
So I guess then where did the number 4 come from? Right? If there's four sets of sine and cosine, what's that?
Yeah, so when we Fourier decompose the embeddings, we see that there are 4 peaks in our Fourier space. So we're picking these out ourselves. We're saying, here's like what I think. I think that numbers for some reason have this like strong periodicity in bases of 2, 5, 10, and 100.
Okay. So you've manually selected out those 4 features.
Yes.
As being salient, and you're moving on with that. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, these are all really good questions. I think this is like an important crux of the project, and it's a little bit confusing if you haven't looked at interp before.
So I think this makes much more sense. Thanks, Subhash. Now returning to the question about the plot. So now, what is that top left plot on the next slide?
Oh yeah. So okay. So I have like I just want to like do an eye test to see if like this makes sense. So I apply like C inverse, whatever C I learned, to like the left of H of A of L, essentially. So hopefully that makes sense so far. And then, for example, for every prompt, like, 1 plus 10 or something like that, I look at the, I can now like, so like this is the projection of like, this 1 plus 10 into like the cosine of A with the period of 2 and sine of A with period of 2. So like, for example, like 1 plus 10 mod 2, like A is 1 in this case. So 1 mod 2 is 1. So we'd expect it to be in this cluster. And for example, if I had 2 plus 10, 2 mod 2 is 0. So I expect it to be in this cluster. And that's why, like, when you get here, when we look at the T equals 10 components, like if I had 11 plus 35, again, A is still 11. So 11 mod 10 is 1. So it would be in this cluster, if that makes sense. This is like an eye test to make sure that our fits are correct. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you say we have a representation that has periodicity for the second square, it looks like 5.
Yes, 5.
So let's plot the representations of all the numbers from 0 to 9 and
exactly.
verify that it indeed does follow this cycle or whatever.
Exactly. That's totally right.
I feel like that's a cool plot. I actually wonder, given the form that you set up, could it have possibly been any other way?
What do you mean?
Are we guaranteed that we're going to see this structure because we already set up that exact?
Yeah, so this is a really important question, actually. So we're assuming that we're seeing this structure because this structure exists in the embedding space. But for example, like we're only fitting, if you really think about it, we're fitting 100 numbers with 9 basis functions. So that's a very expressive fit in some sense. You can fit almost anything with 9 parameters. There's like a famous physics quote that you can fit an elephant with 5 parameters. So example, if you had randomized embeddings, you could also, find some coefficient matrix C that gives you a very pretty plot like this. Does that answer what you're talking about?
I think so. What are the dimensions of C again?
Yeah, so C is H is a 4,000 by 1-dimensional vector. So C and B is a 9 by 1-dimensional vector. So C is a 4,000 by 9-dimensional matrix.
Okay. So you fit all the embeddings. You do regression on all the all the layers to each of the 9 numbers. Okay.
Yeah, we have 100 points to do that with. Yeah. Yeah, so this is a big problem in MechInterp generally, is like, how do we validate our conclusions? So like, we feel strongly that we have some sort of like, periodic structure here and linear structure, but how can we actually see that this helix is like the correct structure for the problem? So MechInterp is like very big. This is a very common technique called activation patching. And activation patching allows us to set up careful counterfactuals in order to show that the conclusions that we reach about model behavior are causal and performative. So this is a lot of words. Oh, look, the helix spins. So this is a somewhat complex technique in MechInterp, and it takes a few spins around to like get your head up on. And I don't know if it's the most useful way to spend our time, but I'll at least like describe a little bit what the intuition is. So the idea is that, okay, I want to test how important a certain hidden state is. A certain hidden state is like for the model to complete a task. So for example, like I have like this task, like A plus B equals. So on the A token, maybe the last layer actually doesn't matter in order to produce the correct answer. So like, what's the intuition for that? So like, if I was doing a task like 10 plus 35 equals, the model needs to respond with 45. That's like the correct answer. And it will do all this computation on the last token. So models, when they do this, generally they'll use an attention head to move the information from 10 and from 35 to the last token. So for an example, within this example, if I change a hidden state after that attention head moves all the information to the last token, nothing should really change. The model should still output 45 like totally correctly, because like all the relevant information has already been transferred by the attention head. But for example, if I like, I don't know, I corrupt the embedding or something like that, for the 10 plus 35 on the 10 token, the model probably can't do the task anymore, because that hidden state is actually really important for the entire computation. So activation patching is like a way for us to figure out, what parts of the model are important for a computation. So the way we do this is we first run the model on a clean prompt. So a clean prompt here is like the example, 10 plus 35. And then we run the model, run the model on a corrupted prompt. So the corrupted prompt here is, 25 plus 35. So the way we determine how effective a certain hidden state is we actually, take it and insert it into the corrupted run. So I think this diagram is like a better way to show this. So this in green here at the very top is like the example of a transformer like going through computation with a clean run. So we want to see how important a certain residual stream value is in order for the computation to do computation, in order for the transformers to do computation. So in gray here is the model running on a corrupted prompt, a different prompt. So we take the residual stream from the clean run, we put it into the corrupted run, and we see how the downstream computation changes a lot. So for example, like if I have the first clean run of 10 plus 35 and the corrupted run of 25 plus 35, if I don't do anything, the model should output, on the corrupted run, 25 plus 35 equals 60. But if I input the hidden state for, 10 into the corrupted run, then the model should output 35 in some sense, or like 45, because I'm restoring information to the model. Does that make sense? I'm happy to take questions on this part as well. But the idea is that I'm isolating here how much a single residual stream can like restore model behavior to a previous state.
When you're replacing, are you replacing a residual stream, or are you like adding something else to it? You're replacing.
No, you just replace it. So it's like just a swap. So this is like this is just like how much the model can restore behavior.
And so you have a lot of choices here to make which, I guess, for a given output token, we're leading up to a specific output here.
Yeah.
Which layer are we intervening at?
You can do this on all layers, and this project does it on all layers. So this kind of determines how strong the representation is of different layers.
Okay,
but like an important nuance here, like for example, if I just swap the input, so imagine instead of swapping the residual stream, I swap the input between the two, like the model should always just respond with whatever the green output was, because like there's no information from the gray run that's preserved, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then second question. So all of this that you're showing on this slide works with a base LLM without doing your special helix projection at all. Are you using your helix projection here yet?
No, for this is just like normal activation patching.
Okay. Okay.
But the way that the helix like becomes important is like, so, you know, instead of taking, so in the green, like when we're replacing this green run into like the gray run, instead of just taking the actual residual stream for like, you know, 10 plus 25, we take the helix fit residual stream for 10 plus 25 and then put it into the gray run. So this is kind of what you're getting at.
Cool,
so I guess like the intuition here is like, if the helix is preserving important information about the structure of numbers, then like when I do this like swap in, like that should be equivalent to just like swapping the layer totally. Does that make sense intuitively?
That makes intuitive sense. Curious whether another experiment would make sense. Would it also make sense to run the base model with, you know, 10 plus 35 and then intervene on a given residual layer, subtract only the helix representation of 35 and add only the helix representation of 38 and see
so
if
that's an ablation in some sense. So yeah, so I did a different experiment in the paper, which is like on 10 plus 25, I just took out all the helix information for, you know, for 10 and to see if the model can still do the task, and it wasn't able to. But you're proposing like an extra step. But yeah, this is like in the idea of doing an ablation. Yeah, so this is like an important concept, and I think this allows us to determine if we have multiple fits, we can see which one does the best because we can see like which one affects the final computation the most in some sense. So and what we're doing here is like, you know, if our clean run is 10 plus 25, our corrupted run is 25 plus 35, we take the original logit for the clean answer of 35, and we take the, now when we do this intervention, we take the logit for the clean answer of 35, and we see how much like adding that residual stream in, or like replacing that residual stream, like pushed our computation towards our clean answer, if that makes sense.
So
yeah, this allows us.
When you say you're adding back the residual stream, what you're doing is you're taking, I'm just trying to understand what's happening here. So because you, like Jason said, you have a lot of choices of how you do this.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're taking the activation from the previous layer and then passing through C and C inverse and then adding that back. Is that what you're doing?
No. So we're taking actually just like our value of here of C B of A of T. So this is our fit value, right? And we're taking that residual stream value for any, like if our prompt is 10 plus 35, we plug in A equals 10, and we have like our formula tells us what the residual stream should be according to our formulation. So we take that residual stream and we plug it back into the model in this activation patching.
And you're doing that at what layer exactly?
We can do this at any layer. So just take it for any layer L. Like we can imagine it for being at layer 0, but the plot I'm going to show this, how we can do this patch at every single layer.
Got it. And you see, you know, when you do this at different layers, do you see different behavior?
Yeah, we'll see something interesting really soon, actually. I can get to that. So this is like a big plot. I'm going to let's focus on the lines in blue here. So the line in black is if I'm just patching like the entire layer. So like on the x-axis is the layer. So we're patching on A plus B equals. We're patching on the A token. So you can see like the first 15 layers. The black patch is really powerful. It really pushes our model towards like the clean answer that we want it to be. But you can see around like layer 15, it starts diminishing a lot. So this is actually tracing the computation through a transformer. So this tells us that like, you know, at around layer 15, the transformer moves all the information from the A token to like the last token in order to actually compute what A plus B equals. So these are very common types of graphs we see in mechanistic interpretability. So then the question is like how good are our fits at recovering this like black behavior, this black line behavior. So for example, the helix is shown in this dashed line. So this is a helix with like, you know, all of the periodic components that we discussed, 2, 5, 10, 100.
Subhash,
we can also look at
Subhash. So now we are really doing A plus B, and are we patching
only
A? But this is just A.
Only patching A. We keep B fixed between all pairs of problems.
I see. So this is A plus B, but we're reading out a logit above the B token. In other words, the output.
Yeah, what the answer for the addition problem should be. So the example here is like, you know, 10 plus 25 and 10 plus 35 and 25 plus 35. So between our pair of problems, the B token is the same. The only thing we're changing between the two is the A token. We want to isolate how much the A token, how good of our fit is on the A token in some sense.
All right. So then to repeat it, something I think you kind of got to, but this seems really important. If we patch over A at like layer 1 or 2, then indeed we do change the answer to A plus B. But if we try to patch layer 24 with the A token, then like it's too late. The network already has the right answer, which is why it dropped.
Yeah, so that's why we see this cutoff. It gradually like diminishes. Attention heads are moving the relevant information to the final token. So that's the black line. So yeah, this dashed line shows our helix fit. This like dotted dash line right below it, this shows us a circular fit. So, our helix has, 2 n periodic components and 1 linear.
Do you see the opposite for the second token, or like the final token, like the equals or whatever you have as the final token, right?
So like what should happen on the last token, you can actually piece this together almost intuitively, is like you can make the patch has like no effect up to like layer 15, and it has a ton of effect after layer 15, because that's when the information is being moved to the last token. So this is a way to trace like computation through the LLM. That was a great question.
Do you actually see that happening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll show that graph later as well if we have time. So I guess like the important thing here is the circular fit, which is like, just the periodic components and no linear component in our basis, is also a very good fit. And what's really important is that like this solid blue line is a PCA baseline. So what this means is like, I compare this to our helical fit to just using the first like 9 components of PCA. So we have a 9 parameter helix fit. So a fair baseline would be using the first like 9 PC dimensions. And the important thing here is like the PCA baseline is actually like a really, really strong baseline, because I mean, you guys know PCA captures like the maximal variance directions within any matrix or something like that. So if there was important information in an activation, you'd expect the PCA to catch it. But the fact that the helix actually beats the PCA baseline, very strongly implies that the helix is the way the model is doing addition. This is like the variable that the model is thinking in, if that makes sense. Yeah.
What is the y-axis we're looking at? So what is logic difference?
Yeah. So, in Transformer, this is a little bit technical, but in Transformers, when you unembed the activations, you have a logit for each value in the vocab. So like, like I am, maybe the logit for blue is really high or something like that. But the logit for like, I don't know, Roxbury is very low or something like that. So we take the logit for, for when we have 10 plus 25 as a clean run and 25 plus 35 is a corrupted run, we take the logit for 35 originally, and we take the logit for 35 actually after we do this insertion activation patching, and we subtract the 2. So we see like how much this activation patching increased the logit of like our target answer in some sense.
And this is before you do any softmax, right?
Yeah, this is before softmax. Okay. There's some problems. There's a debate in interp whether we should use logits or probabilities, but softmax just makes things more messy, and logits are almost linear, so we use them for the most part.
Yeah, so if you do this before the soft, what I'm trying to get at is it might magnify the difference. So in this case, what looks like a big difference may not be as much of a difference when you make project into the probabilities, right?
It's plausibly. I also computed other metrics like accuracy and probability, and nothing really changed. But it's a good point that like it is a design choice what to make, what to do.
Yeah, probably like things like accuracy might actually have been better to look at in this case. Yeah,
I sort of disagree. Accuracy is a coarse-grained metric in some sense, and logit difference is very fine-grained. It's almost continuous. But softmax, because it squashes stuff, it doesn't. There's a debate. We can talk offline about this, but there's like a debate about what to do. So yeah, this brings us like sort of to the end of like at least the first part of the talk, and I'm coming up on time, so I'm happy to just finish presenting on this. But an important takeaway here is this is a lot of additional evidence against the linear representation hypothesis. This helix is like totally nonlinear. There's some previous research that found the features for the days of the week, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, was also nonlinear. But yeah, this is an important work in the sense of like we target the LRH for revision. I'll just cut to like a couple of slides because I don't think I have enough time to go through the next half of the talk. So I guess like high level, so we know how these numbers are represented. How are they actually combined to do addition? So this is like the clock algorithm, we call it. It's called the clock algorithm because you can imagine it as like hands on the clock. So here we have this addition problem of 3 plus 63. So we have like a representation for 63 on these like different periodic dials, and like the linear direction. And then we can do 3 plus 63. What an LLM does, it does 3 plus 63 by rotating the 63 vector, 3 spots. So in like the t equals 10 dial, this goes from like from pointing to 3 o'clock to pointing at like 6 o'clock, essentially. In the like t equals 2 dial, this points from like pointing directly down in the odd direction up to the even direction. So like this is like the basic intuition for how I found the transformers actually do this type of addition. So
This is,
a lot of
when you say rotate, let's say we're doing 3 plus 63. In the t equals 2, does it actually rotate it 63 times around, or does it rotate it 63 mod 2 times around?
So there's no way for me. I actually can't know. This is an important limitation of the work that like I think. So what's really happening here is like to do a plus b, a LLM is doing cosine of a and cosine of b and producing cosine of a plus b, and does that with sine terms as well. But an important limitation here is like that I actually don't find how this computation is actually done. So of course there's this very famous trig identity of like, if you have cosine of a and cosine of b, you can find cosine of a plus b by multiplying some stuff together, But we're unable to actually isolate that computation in the LLM. And this kind of gets to like the complexity of mechanistic interpretability. Like, when do we consider an explanation like good enough? And like how deep do we want to dig, knowing that these things are like just really complex, like kind of behemoths that we're trying to analyze here. There's a couple more results that I'll show like very quickly. We can skip through most of these slides. Something that I found very beautiful and one of my favorite plots in the paper actually is like, if you look at the activations for different neurons on different problems. So just like a heads up, a neuron is like any one of the values in like that middle layer. So an MLP does an up projection and then a down projection. And then like if neuron 0 could be the top neuron and neuron 1 is the one right below it, whatever. So every neuron just like it applies some weight vector to the inputs, and then it applies like a nonlinearity, a GELU to that value. So like on any problem a plus b, the neuron in layer 12 at index 4000 has exactly like one value essentially. So these heat maps show the activation maps of different really important neurons in the model. So like the x-axis, the y-axis here is the value of a in the problem being run, and the y-axis here is the value of a in the problem being run, and the x-axis here is the value of b in the problem being run. So you can see there's a lot of like really beautiful like periodicity going on. So like in the second plot here, we see that this neuron primarily activates on like with a periodicity of 10 and with a periodicity of 5. So like, maybe if like a plus b, or like maybe on like 10 plus 12, it doesn't activate at all, but like on 12 plus 12, it activates a lot, because it activates in the correct like periodicity of that neuron. And all these different neurons have like very different periodicities that form these very nice patterns, which I found, very compelling. And I guess like, bigger picture, how this computation is done to do a plus b. What I found was that MLPs 14 to 18 like kind of take the A and B helices. So there's a helix for the number A and there's a helix for the number B. That helix is moved to the last token. MLPs 14 to 18 read both of these helices and then create an A plus B helix. So for like 10 plus 25, the helix for 10 and the helix for 25 is combined to make the helix for 35, which is very cool. And then LLPs 19 to 27, like most of the rest of the computation in the transformer, takes this A plus B helix. So this is like the A plus B helix is how the model thinks about the answer. It's a variable that it's thinking in. It's thinking in terms of helix. And like MLPs 19 to 27 take this A plus B helix and convert it like down to logits such that we can understand it. So it's this very understandable algorithm going on in an LLM. And I guess like importantly, to go over limitations, and I'll try to leave 5 minutes for questions at least. We know the gist of this algorithm. So we give it in token space A plus B. It creates helix of A and helix of B in representation space. It creates helix of A plus B in representation space, and then the LLM outputs A plus B in token space again. So this is like the gist of what's going on here. Really importantly, kind of like what Jason was pointing out, we actually don't know how you go from helix of A, helix of B to helix of A plus B. Again, there's this idea of trig identities, but we don't know. And like Actually, what's really cool about this work is like a similar thing was found by Neil Nanda when he trained one layer transformers, very basic transformers, to do a very similar task. He found a very similar clock algorithm himself. And he also was unable to isolate this computation in the model. So it kind of just goes to show you how complex LLMs are, transformers are, like machine learning is. We like even in simple models, it's difficult for us to understand everything.
Couldn't you look at when you basically look at the plus token and what that how that is transforming things, right? And then I mean, if you go step by, I mean, this is fairly simple, right? So you should be able to look at those. So what happens? You start with the A, and then if you give it the plus sign, it's going to transform that somehow, right? And then eventually you give it the second number, and then when you have the equals, of course, is what at the stage that you've already looked at, right? So you would sort of get a sense of how it's transforming stuff over the different
Actually,
tokens.
so a lot of the computation happens only on the last token. Nothing really happens on the plus token. But what happens on the last token is somehow you go from A and B separately to A and B combined. And that actually is a really complex transformation that's happening in I don't know what way. And I think like an important note here is like this is only one way the transformer does addition. So I imagine this is the primary way, like most of LLM addition happens this way. But actually, Joshua Batson from Anthropic is going to speak in a couple of weeks to this group. And his most recent paper actually found on Claude, found that, this is a big way that transformers do computation or that LLMs do addition. But there's other like side parallel algorithms that they're also using. So instead of like humans, like when we do addition, we have like one single algorithm that we write down. These LLMs are like doing things in many different ways and combining results in parallel. So there's like in MechInterp in general, there's a very long tail of really interesting model behavior that's very difficult for us to capture. So in some sense, this is just like the first order conclusion for how LLMs do addition. And I'll get to like just like some takeaways. I think it's very crazy that like any LLMs learn a very real mathematical algorithm. Like this is very beautiful that like you just learn this algorithm from next token prediction. You learn how to do 10 plus 20 with these very nice representations in this sort of clock algorithm. So there's some questions about how you change sort of like these different algorithms together if you're doing a multi-step problem, and how this algorithm emerges at scale is also interesting to me. And then I guess like takeaways for interpretability in general, this is a really good interp study in the sense that you want to understand representations and you want to understand circuits. So a lot of MechInterp research does features and circuits research separately, but you really want to combine them. So we want to see how numbers are represented, and then we want to use an understanding of how numbers are represented to understand how LLMs do a certain task. And there's also the question, kind of the philosophical question about what constitutes an understanding, like how low level do we want our like understanding to be. And the most important thing I think is like this is a very intensive, like this took me a lot of work I think over a couple months, but it was ultimately still very limited. And the question is like, how do we internalize the bitter lesson in MechInterp? How do we like use scale and deep learning in order to like learn things about machine learning models more easily? So sparse autoencoders have been proposed as a way to do that. I have some work, pretty strongly against SAEs, and I don't believe in SAEs. And Google DeepMind recently came out against SAEs as well, and deprioritizing that sort of research. So the field is a little bit astray right now. It's a very good time to be doing MechInterp research. And I guess that gets me into the last point. If you found this interesting at all, if you want to read more, Neil Nanda has a really good MechInterp paper reading list that's what got me into the field like a year ago. There are some hands-on things like Cal McDougall's Arena tutorials. And if you really want to dive, like head in, Matt's is a really good AI safety research training program that I, strongly suggest all of you guys do. But I'm happy to take questions. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thanks for the talk. Any questions, Nathaniel? Maybe.
So my question is related to your previous comment. So as you said, the model managed to learn the clock algorithm, but maybe it doesn't always use it. So my question is there a way to detect when the model is using this algorithm and maybe when it's only memorizing data from the training set? Because you don't get 100% accuracy on this task, right? Yeah. So what happens when it doesn't get it right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So this is actually a really interesting thing about how the transformer is doing this computation that I didn't include plots for this. I probably should have. So what's happening is like, if I output 10 plus 25, if I'm doing the problem 10 plus 25, why is the answer 35? So in the logit space, so again, logits are like for every token in the vocabulary, I have some sort of value for how likely the model thinks like that token is to be the answer. So how does the logit space actually look? It looks very beautifully like periodic actually. So like the model would have the highest probability on the token 35, but also it would think that 25 is likely, 45, 55, 65, anything that's the answer mod 10 or like mod 10 is congruent with, the model also thinks that might be the answer. So the reason for that is that like you can think about the way the model is doing this computation as a sort of like constructive interference. So like it adds up all these different signals, in mod 2 and mod 5 and mod 10 and mod 100. And finally, it promotes like 10 plus 25 is 35 as the correct answer. But what happens when the model is not getting the correct answer is it doesn't have enough signal to do this like constructive interference correctly with all these different like periodic signals. Sorry, I threw a lot at you that I didn't have in the slides already, but this is like how the model is actually doing the addition. And importantly, I'm saying that it's not doing, like 25% of problems, it'll do this algorithm, 75% this other algorithm. What's actually happening is it's doing a bunch of these algorithms together. So like, maybe in like a certain set of neurons is doing one algorithm, a certain set of neurons in the same layer is doing a different algorithm. So it's a lot of this like sort of like messy jumble of algorithms that are going on in parallel. It's not like a cleanly like delineable, separatable set of algorithms.
May I ask, did you find any addition was done incorrectly?
Yeah. I'm like 25% of problems were done incorrectly by this model. 2% of problems were done incorrectly by like Llama 3.18b. So like, slightly better models can do much better. But again, it goes back to like why the model is doing this wrong. It's because it didn't have enough signal to do the constructive interference correctly in the logit space.
And did you look at the situation was done correctly? How the situation which did incorrectly different from the situation it does correctly?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to how like the logits look. So like, there's one key problem with this is that like this technique of activation patching, that's kind of the heart of this paper. It requires that all the pairs of prompts have like the correct target answer that we expect. So it's very difficult actually to use activation patching. If the model responded 10 plus 25 equals 45, so it got it wrong, then we couldn't use that problem anymore to do activation patching. So this paper is kind of an understanding of what the model is doing when the model gets it right in some sense. It would require a different set of techniques. This is not easily applicable to understanding what's happening when the model goes wrong. Although there's a section in my appendix where I like make a foray into this that I think is like promising.
I also have another general question. You mentioned that you choose this model because give one embedding. So then it's a consistent embedding. I'm wondering how you be able to combine arbitrary embedding into one embedding. Is it possible?
Yeah, it's easy. It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier. Like, so you have this thing like Star Wars, this concept that's represented in 2 tokens. How you combine Star Wars into 1 token is like maybe at like layer 3 or something. There's an attention head that just like combines them on the same token, and then that's what you use as your representation later on. It's just like that's an additional level of complexity that's not that interesting. So I didn't study that. But originally I was working on this model Gemma 2 9b. It's a Google model, and it used a different tokenization for each number, which was really just a pain, and it just like slowed down my progress a lot. So I felt like it wasn't worth it. But I think this is like pretty easily applicable to the multi-token regime. I don't think that's a problem.
You don't know why it founded it. Is that right? I don't
know what.
Let me give more general situation. Like you have a novel or book. I want embedding for one sentence, each sentence, or I want embedding for one paragraph. I want embedding for whole section or chapter. Do you know where to find it?
Like how I would do that?
Yeah. So give you a note. I want arbitrary embedding for paragraph. How to get the embedding for that paragraph?
I have no idea. I mean, a lot of these like providers have embedding models where they, like context, like variable context length, it'll always create a fixed length vector that exists. I don't really know how it works though, but it's possible.
Okay, thank you. Anybody knows?
I think it's there's a lot of work in that direction. I don't have a good general answer. I think Jeff and Andrew have their hands up for questions.
Yeah. I guess 2 questions. One is, how did you have or form that hypothesis to look at the Fourier transform? Because I think that was a key step. And
Yeah.
I'm curious what led you there. And minor question is, how did you identify those neurons with periodic patterns?
Yeah, these are both really good questions. So I guess like the first question is almost like a narrative question. I originally started this project wanting to do something much more ambitious. I wanted to figure out how like multi-step reasoning was done in LLM. So like 8 plus 16 times 4 minus 12, whatever, like really long chains of problems. And I kept getting stuck. You know, my boss and I was a new I just started doing mechanistic interpretability. It was the beginning of my master's, and my professor, you know, Tegmark Max, he was like, okay, like we need to like, if you're getting really stuck, then just like boil it down, like get really, really simple. Just figure out how numbers are represented. So I was like, okay, I'll try doing that. And it was really interesting, actually. I didn't look at Fourier components for a while, but when I PCA'd, like PC1, PC2, PC3, PC4, they all looked like quadratic. It was really weird. And I was like, how am I going to parameterize this? I have no idea. So originally I had a bunch of polynomial fits and stuff like that. But then somebody, maybe it was me or maybe it was somebody else, suggested maybe it's actually circular. And for some reason, circles look quadratic in PCA space. And I think actually they do. I don't know why, but when you PCA a circle, it often, like a high dimensional circle, it often does look quadratic. So, you know, I finally Fourier decomposed, and finally I got these periods that made a lot of sense and made the story much cleaner in my head. But originally I was very stuck for a very long time on this. And I guess to your second point, this is more of a, you know, in the same way that we're activation patching residual streams to figure out, you know, where the logic difference is really high, like in this plot, you can also do patching on like arbitrary components. Like I could patch this plot shows patching on an attention head, but you could also patch an MLP, or I could patch a single neuron from NLP. So activation patching can be as fine-grained or as coarse-grained as you want. So when we activation patch single neurons, we find that these neurons have like the highest logic difference in some sense. But those are both really good questions.
Jeff, maybe?
My question is, there's in the paper, it says, you know, to identify representational trends, we ran GPTJ on the single token integers. And like the tokenization, you mentioned the tokenization is, you know, sort of critical to getting the whole thing process started. I guess what that makes me think of is like, is there something that's kind of artificial about this 2-digit integer? Like, would somehow the result change if you went to 3 digits? Because something about the tokenization is like baked in. I mean, the other dimension that comes to mind is radix, right? Like, to what degree would this continue to make sense or not if the radix was not 10?
What is radix?
Like for decimal, the radix is 10. For hexadecimal, for binary, the radix is 2.
Oh, like our base.
The base, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So first question first. I think that so for here, GPTJ tokenizes all numbers from 0 to 360 as single tokens. So like if I did A and B between 0 and 180, I don't think anything would change really. Your question about like it maybe in the single
so maybe I misunderstood the first part. I sort of got the sense that when you were picking your two numbers, the reason you were doing 2 digits is so that it would come out as 2 tokens. But what you're saying is you picked 2 digits so that it would come out as 1 token.
Yeah, exactly. The answer is in single token space.
Is it? Okay.
I mean, it's both actually.
That clears up one thing. Great. Go on.
Yeah, and so I guess the question is like, why do these periods actually emerge, 2, 5, 10, 100? And my hypothesis actually gets at what you're talking about. Like, so it makes sense that, you know, LLMs, they read all the text ever written on Earth or whatever. And most of the text, I guess, like has decimal system numbers. So like, it makes sense that it learns that 10 and 100 are really important periods when we process tokens that are numbers, right? It makes a little bit less sense to me why 2 and 5 are important. But 2, I mean, a lot of things in the world are also binary. Binary is used a lot, I guess. Like that's what I would guess is most common outside of base 10, maybe base 16. I don't know. But it makes sense that like, you know, LLMs have a direction for like even or odd. And I guess that's what that represents to me. T equals 5, I don't really know why that period is so prominent in the representations. But if your question is like, what if we lived in a world where like we actually just use hexadecimal always, or, you know, for everything, then I would expect we'd see 16 and 256 as our important periods. I think the LLMs are just learning something about how we usually think about numbers, and it's representing that itself.
Huh. not sure what to think off the top of my head, but maybe I'll send you an email or something.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
Thank you. Yeah.
One random idea. I don't know if this is dumb, but you spent a lot of time and did a lot of work in really showing the representations of kind of A and B, the tokens, and then we still don't know exactly how the algorithm is computed. So how the A plus B algorithm is computed. You proposed a clock algorithm. So like this makes intuitive sense. If you have the representation that you showed for A and B, then a clock algorithm could work to indeed compute the answer. But as you mentioned, it's really hard to figure out, is this the algorithm that the network is implementing internally or not? Here's the idea, it might be stupid. If you have a proposed algorithm that you think the network might be implementing, and you write it down in analytical form, we can evaluate that function in any way we want. We can slice it up. We can figure in particular the gradient out. So what I'm wondering is if we put in our helix representation of A and B, we put it through the clock algorithm in kind of simple analytical form. Let's imagine we take A and change it from like 7 plus 9 to like 7.01 plus 9. We like move A very slightly, and then we look how the answers representation would change. We can kind of evaluate like the gradient through that function, or literally just take neighboring values and see how it moves. And then maybe we can go to the network and see, as we wiggle A around in the same way, can we see the network's answer changing with the same gradient? So if those match, that might be some evidence. Here's why it might be a stupid idea, because maybe the gradient is just going to be 1 because it's addition. So like, of course it's going to match because it couldn't be anything else. I don't really know.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. I think this like kind of brings up, so it's important to identify exactly where we feel the understanding is limited. So I feel very confident that A and B are represented as helices, and these helices are used for downstream computation. And we know through like activation patching, which is, you know, a very causal technique, that doing some sort of adjustment, kind of like what you're saying, changes the answer in the way we expect it to. But the important thing we don't know is, like, even though we know how the inputs are represented and we know that it changes the outputs in the correct way, what remains in the middle is still murky. It's like, it's not exactly a black box, but it's not exactly a white box either. You know, we're like halfway there. It's like it's opaque in some sense. That's where I feel like a lot of the questions I have around how this works lies. Actually, Batson's work from next week or in a couple of weeks, whenever it is, shows that very explicitly that he found like non-Fourier algorithms to do addition as well, in combination with like the Fourier algorithms that I find, the clock algorithm that I find. And I think that, I don't know. I think this study told me that, you know, things are kind of a mess in interp, and, you know, we might be a little screwed in terms of safety for using interp because things are so complex. Even to figure out addition was so hard. How the heck are we going to figure out how O3 does frontier math? I don't know, and I'm not very optimistic on that. But I think that Anthropic has like an automated technique that's like very cool, and, you know, they found a lot of similar things that what I found, but they didn't do it as much by hand. So hopefully you guys learn something really cool when they come present next week.
Totally. Feels like every month, you know, LLMs learn to do 10 more things, and we understand how they do 0.5 of those things or something, right?
Yeah.
They always get further ahead than our understanding. We're a bit over time, so let's everyone take a chance to thank Subhash for the presentation. Thanks, Subhash. We're going to wrap up here quickly. I just want to mention, again, we have a research jam in a couple weeks, and then the talk next week is the second in this series. It'll be by Nolan Day from Cerebrus on how using neuron-based explanations is fundamentally limited and hard. So if you buy what Subhash just said here at the end, come back next week for more. All right, thanks all. See you next week.